So you have an older PC, presumably like this. This is an Acer kind of all-in-one tower, as you can see here. The manufacturer date on this is about 2015. It's a little slow, it's a little sluggish. What can we do to make it refreshed without having to buy a new computer, spend potentially thousands of dollars on a brand new system? Hi, my name is Gray. I am a CompTIA certified IT technician, and let's go ahead and talk about some easy ways that you can do to make your system a little faster without going out and buying a brand new one. Again, this manufacturer date is 2015, as you can see down here. So it's coming up on that 10 years old, okay? For a computer, that's a long time. And I bet by now, maybe you have Windows 11 on here. I know I do on here. And it's a little sluggish, it's a little slow. So what are some things that we can do? Well, let's go ahead and get into this. What we're going to be doing today is not only replacing our RAM, which I will go ahead and tell you a little bit more about that later. We're also going to be replacing our CPU. Again, I'll tell you a little more about that later. And yes, you can do this from home really easily. We're also going to be putting in a USB card. So this is going to add a couple USB for you, make it a little easier, maybe plug in some extra things that you need to. Again, we'll talk about all of this when we get there. So first things first, let's kind of look around here. So we have our rear I/O back here. We have our side panel. And let's go ahead and take this side panel off. So you'll see there's probably going to be a few screws, usually one down here and one up here. Looks like I just have one up at the top there, so I'm going to go ahead and take that guy off. And then typically, they'll just slide off like that. So you can just kind of pull it, and it will slide off. Sometimes there's a little clip back here that you'll have to pull down, but on this case, it just folds, not folds, it just kind of comes out like that. And you'll see inside the computer here, at first, it's a little overwhelming, especially if you don't really know what you're looking at. So let's kind of get a quick little basis of what we're looking at here. Right here, you can see kind of a vertical fan that's facing towards you. This is typically going to be the CPU. The central processing unit is what that stands for. Controls all the mathematics, all the logistics of what's going on. It's really important part. In the background, you can see a big green thing. That's the motherboard. Sometimes it'll be black, sometimes it'll be gray. In this case, it's green. The motherboard is what connects everything together. So it's kind of the, yeah, I mean, it's the brain. It's what connects everything. It's the central nervous system. That's the word I'm looking for. Here we have our DVD drive. Down here we have our power supply where all the wires are coming out of. And again, it looks like a big kind of bunch of stuff right now, right? But we're going to go ahead and condense this down. So the first thing we're going to do is upgrade our RAM. Now RAM, this is what it looks like. Sometimes it doesn't have this heat sink on here. It just kind of looks like a PCB. RAM stands for Random Access Memory. And this is your short-term memory. So things that are actively happening, this will keep track of. It'll keep kind of storage of what's going on there. And a lot of the times with these pre-built systems here, they really come with a bad RAM configuration. Typically only one stick, and also typically less RAM than you're wanting. For instance, with this stick, it only comes with for this system, it only comes with one stick of 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now, typically, especially if you're doing lots of workloads, so stuff like rendering, or in this case, you know, lots of browsing on the internet, that kind of stuff, 4 gigs of RAM is just not enough, especially with one stick. You typically are going to want 2. You'll be able to run dual channel RAM. It's better for everything. It's better for your CPU, runs everything a little bit faster. Now you're going, where's the RAM, right? Well, it's going to be in these long slots right here, but how are we going to get to it? Well, we got to get rid of this guy. So a lot of the times what you're going to do is you're going to see these little black clips that connect to the front panel here. Go ahead and just kind of clip those off, and usually it'll just kind of come off like this. Go ahead and take that guy off. You can see here. Now, we took that off, but that guy isn't moving. Well, if we go up here, again, a lot of the time, some of these systems will be a little different. Sometimes it'll have a little pull tab, but a lot of the time it's easy to figure out. Here, we have one screw here and one screw here. So we're going to go ahead and take those guys off, because that is what's connecting that DVD drive in here. Go ahead and take those guys off. All right, and now this thing should, lift right up and out. So there's going to be some wires connecting here. That's not an issue. What we're looking at here, so we have our DVD drive here. This has a few different wires connected to it. You can leave them on there if you want, if you think you're going to get them mixed up. But otherwise, you can really just keep them out of the way. Go ahead and unplug them, and maybe keep them right outside the case so that you know what you're looking for when you go back to replug them in. And we also have our SSD in here. So sometimes this will also be a hard drive. It'll be a lot bigger, but this is where your long-term memory is going to be. Again, you can just go ahead and unplug these for now, or leave them in and just set this to the side if you're feeling a little weary of plugging it back in. All right, so now this opens it up a little bit more. And you can see our stick of RAM here. Now, again, it's one stick of 4 gigabytes of RAM. That's not very good. When you upgrade this RAM, a few things that you can do, if you know the standard of RAM that you have in your computer, for instance, I guess with usable computers nowadays, it's either going to be DDR3 or DDR4, and now we're getting into DDR5. Now, that is the standards of RAM. This one here is DDR3. And if you don't know, you can always get to this point, take this out, and you'll be able to tell by a few key steps. But you can see here that this is what RAM looks like, just kind of a long stick, right? You can see these black things on here are the memory modules. So this all equals to 4 gigabytes in total. Now, yeah, like I said, this is a DDR3 stick. There are lots of diagrams online that you can look up DDR3 versus DDR3 or 4 versus DDR5 and be able to tell just by looking at it. It's a lot of the times with the placement of this little notch here. It's an easy way to tell. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. I picked up this kit of dual channel DDR3 RAM for relatively cheap. You can really get these for pretty cheap now. You can get them for 15, 20 bucks. And this is going to increase your performance of everyday use by quite a bit, especially if you're doing some light gaming. Obviously, this is not a gaming PC, but if you're playing stuff like Banished or CS or whatever, this is really going to help that. So what we're going to do to install this, you can see that I have 2 slots here. Now these slots both have clips. We're going to go ahead and open all 4 of these clips. All right, once all 4 of these clips are open, we're going to go ahead and line up now. You heard me talk about that notch a second ago. That's very important because in the motherboard, there's also a notch. So go ahead and line those up. You go ahead and follow the grooves of where the old one was, and go ahead and snap it into place by using both hands and applying even pressure on both the top and bottom. You'll hear a click and feel a click, just like that. And go ahead and repeat the process with the other stick. And just like that, you have upgraded your RAM. Now again, this is really going to help with day-to-day tasks. It's really going to help with video editing, especially when you're needing lots of RAM, lots of access to that short-term memory. That's really going to help. And again, this is the DDR3 category. You can go ahead and look up DDR3 versus DDR4, and you'll be able to see the differences that are pretty clear. Again, you just look at that bottom there, and you'll be able to tell really easily. Another really easy way to tell if it's DDR3 or DDR4 is going in Task Manager in Windows. So, like with this is a Windows machine, you go ahead and go to the Start button, and you type in Task Manager. You go ahead and open that up. There's a Performance tab. And in that, you'll be able to see the speed of your RAM. So you'll click on memory. It'll say 4 or 8 or 16 or however much you have. Click on that. And under, it'll say speed. A lot of the time with DDR3, it's going to be in the thousands of megahertz. Excuse me. So you'll be, or sorry, mega transfers. So you'll be able to see that if it's, 15, 30 or whatever. It's typically going to be DDR3. And if it's anything above 2000, it'll typically be DDR4, but again, this is not a hard tell way of telling. A lot of the time you can be swapping between both speeds with the standards. So keeping that in mind, go ahead and look up online DDR3 versus DDR4 and how to tell. Super easy once you can see the signs. Okay, next we're going to be moving on to the little bit of a harder part. Know that if you're not going to want to do this, you can go ahead and exit the video now. But if you would stay around, this is generally pretty easy, especially in this system. A lot of systems are built kind of exactly like this, so it's really pretty easy. Now what we've got in here is an i3-4160. So this is an Intel Core i3. It's actually labeled right here on the front, Intel Core i3. And this is a 4th gen CPU. Again, the way I know that is in Task Manager. In that same place where we saw the memory mega transfers, you can also see the CPU. And in the info part of that, you can see what the CPU name is. For instance, this one's an i3-4160. Now, an easy way to just know how to upgrade is just look up 4th gen Intel CPUs. You can buy them used for pretty cheap. I have not really had any issues with buying used PC parts, but I know that there are scams out there, so be careful. But what I upgraded to here is an i5 4570. So this is the i5 variant of the 4th gen CPUs. I didn't go with the K version of the i5 because that's going to be pulling a little bit too much power than I want to be putting in this system. This is a pretty light load system, not going to be made for gaming or anything like that. No real hard workloads. We have a pretty light power supply here, so I don't want to be putting in a power-sucking CPU. Now, as you may know or may not know, the Intel naming scheme typically goes Intel i3 is at the bottom, i5 is in the middle, and then you have the i7s, which are going to be upgraded typically for workstations or gaming, and then i9s, which is going to be the kind of cream of the crop, really powerful CPUs from Intel. So the i5, upgrading from an i3 to an i5 is going to be a really big advantage. The i3 typically is pretty slow no matter what. So going to an i5 CPU is really going to boost your performance, especially in an old thing like this. A lot of the times these will get slower over time and won't work with newer software. So upgrading stuff like this is really going to be helpful. So we're going to go ahead and remove the CPU cooler here. You'll see there are 4 screws. Those will be the exact same size bit that you use to take off the screws for the DVD drive as well as the front of the case. It's going to be same size as those guys. So we are all good to just go ahead and go to town. Now when you're loosening this guy here, you want to be going on opposite sides. So once you've got this first guy off, you'll kind of tell because it'll kind of click off there. Go ahead and go to the other side. This is because we don't want to damage anything on here. Computer parts, as robust as they might be nowadays, they're still very fragile. And under the CPU are lots of pins. So the CPU here on the back side has a bunch of little pads here that connect. They rest on the pins that are on the motherboard. I'll show you here in a second. And transfer data. And those pins are very susceptible to bending and or breaking. And obviously that's not good. We don't want that. That would leave your system useless and broken. So of course we don't want that. So we're going to go ahead and loosen this guy. I'm going to do some of these a little more. Sometimes these things are a little stubborn. They like to stay on there. A little more on this guy. All right. So now that we've got this guy off, you'll see there's a wire connecting it. That's just for the fan. Go ahead and pull that guy out. Remember where it goes, of course. It's going to go in the CPU fan connector. Sometimes it'll say it, sometimes it won't. It looks like that guy. And on the motherboard, there is a corresponding place to plug it in. Now you'll see here, we have kind of our fan array. This is typically known as a flower array of our fin stack here, the connection. And you'll notice this kind of gray goop that's all over the place. This is actually thermal paste. And this is really good because it's a conductive material that goes in between the heat sink here and the CPU to really be able to cool better. It creates that kind of barrier. You can go ahead and wipe this off because we're going to actually apply new thermal paste. Thermal paste is really accessible to get. It's one of those things that really you never hear about unless you do something like this. But you can get these kind of everywhere. You can get them at Best Buy. This is a Corsair XTM50. I really like this thermal paste. It's a really good price to performance. It's not very expensive. I think this tube cost me $7. And I've used this on, I don't know, 10 or 11 PCs, and we're not even halfway done. So I really like this stuff. Again, I got this for $7 at Best Buy. Super easy. Back to the CPU. You'll see the CPU here in kind of a socket thing. Now, this is an Intel CPU, so it's going to look like this kind of across the board. Going way back into the early 2000s, they'll still look kind of just like this. If it's an AMD CPU, it might be a little different. But the same basic premise is the same. So we see our little tab here. This actually goes, you push down and out, and then it will kind of automatically come up. You can then pull this backwards, pull that backwards, and we now have the CPU. You want to go ahead and carefully pull this guy up, and there's those pins that I was talking about. So here you can see those pads that are on the bottom of the CPU here. There's that top of that i3. We're going to go ahead and set that guy aside, set it on its head. So it's resting just like that. So as I said here, there are those, I mean, there's a ton of those little guys in there. Let's go ahead and open up our new CPU. This is the 4570. Again, you can get these for really cheap, especially used. Well, I mean, I would definitely buy this used. With it being this old, I would definitely buy all of these parts used. If you try and get new old stock, they're going to be probably overpriced and not what you're wanting. So we're going to go ahead and place this in the exact same way that it came out. And the way that it came out was the words that are on it, the i5 4570 words, are facing that way. So we're going to go ahead and place it in here, gently, of course, until you can kind of feel it drop in there. And that's in there. So then you want to go ahead and place that guy over there, come back so that these teeth can grab that screw, and then push forward, down, and then over and under. So now that's secured in there, we're going to go ahead and put on the thermal paste. Now you don't need to apply a lot of this, especially for a CPU like this that's going to be this old. I really wouldn't worry too much about it. Geez, if I can get this guy open. All right, now that we have this guy open, we're going to go ahead and on here, you're just going to place a little bead. So it's going to be just about that much. Is going to be perfect. And then once that's on there, we're going to take that CPU cooler and we're going to just place it right back on, aligning the screws on here with the screw holes on there. All right, once that's aligned, we're going to go ahead and start tightening this in. The same concept, it's going to be opposite corners. So we're going to do this side first, and then once that's tight, we're going to go ahead and go to the opposite corner. Again, the same reason we're doing this for the other, we're doing this for the same reasons that we did it on the other time. It's to have even pressure as we're tightening it. You know, like I said before, we don't want uneven pressure. That can hurt the pins, it can hurt the CPU. We don't want any of that because we want a working computer. All right, so once these guys are tied down, go ahead and plug that fan back in. Again, that's going to be in that same place that we found it before. Go ahead and do some cable managing maybe first. Well, that's not important to this video, but you can cable manage however you'd like. And now that that's done, we now have an upgraded kit of RAM and an upgraded CPU. So this is really going to run quite a bit better. So let's go ahead and put this back. So with this guy here, we have our SSD here and our DVD drive here. You'll see that they both have the exact same connectors on them. And you can see that on the motherboard, you have two connectors that correspond with each of these. Well, that's nice and helpful, isn't it? So we're going to go ahead and plug these guys back in. Okay. And plug these guys back in. And sometimes these can get flipped around, no big deal. All right, now that that's back in, we can go ahead and seat it exactly where it was. So in this case, it was right in here. Again, I'm not worrying about cable management right now, but you can spend as much time as you would like worrying about that. And we're gonna go ahead and screw those screws back into the front here where we had taken them off that first time. And again, sometimes this step isn't necessary. Sometimes you can just pull this whole piece off with the DVD drive, and it's just nice and easy. But for this system, it requires a little more work. There we go. All right, once we have that piece on, we can go ahead and put this front piece on. Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead and put this front piece back on. And before I close this up, I'm going to go over the easiest part of this, which is the USB expansion. So this cute little guy will add 2 USB ports to your computer, and this is easily the easiest one to do. Now, over here, usually below your CPU, you will see a few other long ports here. These are called PCIe lanes, and these are to add expansion cards. So things like a graphics card for gaming would go in here, or expansion cards like this, which goes in this little one. Now, a lot of the time, they will have a little cover on here. Of course, it's missing there, but there's a screw right here that you can take off, remove that, and replace it with this. So this goes into that slot. You can see how you slot it in here. It then goes into the slot and you push down firmly. And then where you removed that screw with the cover, you go ahead and replace it with this. And you end up with that. Now this has a Molex power connector. For this PC, however, you don't need to connect that. And a lot of the time, you won't need to connect that. These should still work perfectly fine without it. But again, with other PCs, with different PCIe connectors or older CPUs, potentially, you might need to connect that. All right, so now our last step is to just go ahead and put the side panel back on exactly how we found it. Like these can be. There we are. And go ahead and screw it back in like normal. And just like that, we have upgraded our computer. Now this is going to run considerably faster. You're definitely going to notice a difference. I did when I practiced this, kind of made sure that this was all going to work, especially when I had to test these new parts. I noticed a difference kind of immediately. Now, of course, I'm not new to PCs. I've been doing this for a while now. Built hundreds of computers at this point, but it still shocks me how much just upgrading small things like that, well, I guess those are actually pretty big things, but stuff that really doesn't require a lot of the time, it really doesn't require a lot of knowledge. You can really do it pretty quickly, and you're all good to go. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I'll be able to answer all of them. And hey, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.